Okay, the third week. Insanity is what? Repeating the same behavior and expecting a different result. I did the same thing the third. Fourth week I said, we got to do something different. This isn't going anywhere. Okay. And so what we did was an exercise where we're not going to repeat with you, but we did an exercise to compare all the reasons that we give for not forgiving. They don't deserve it. They haven't apologized yet. I'll just get walked on all over again. They will just repeat their behavior if I forgive them. All kinds of reasons, all right? And then I tell a little story about, it's a make-up story, about being in a car accident, being physically injured, and I'm not going to go to the hospital because that other driver hasn't apologized yet. Or that other driver doesn't deserve me going to the hospital. I'm dying, of course, because I'm bleeding, but that person doesn't. And all of a sudden, the reasons for not getting help for my physical injury, the same list, don't make nearly as much sense as why I say I'm not going to forgive. And so the motivation for a significant number of people is because it's for my own healing. It's not for what I'm doing for the other person. It's what I'm doing for myself. Instead of me bleeding to death, I'm going to go to the hospital and get this injury taken care of. And we're here, in this case, we're here in the hospital because we got serious injury and we want to get better. What are we going to do about that? Here's this whole path towards healing and recovery that you can say, I'm not going to do that. And what's going to change? How are things going to get better if you don't start to? So that was the motivation. The exercise towards motivation was to get us out of the word and the concept and maybe the misunderstanding of forgiveness and say, it's healing. It's a path to healing. And these are steps that we take. And in fact, coupled with like what we teach in the trauma recovery program, they've already done many of those things in the process as I described it. So the process has about 20 pieces to it, and they've done 8 to 10 of them by the time we're even presenting the concept of forgiveness. They're on the way already. Instead of saying, now you have to begin this, we can say, no, you're already doing it. You're on the way.
May I interject something?
Okay.
The bishop's request that we not talk about the genocide in that context was a reasonable request. It was a valid request because the people that we were training were not just helpers, they were also survivors. They were victims. And we weren't in a position to do therapy with them and help them work through that. But ultimately, they have to be able to talk about it. And so his counsel for that context was fine, but not in a general way, which is one of my concerns because there is a climate there of not talking about it. Especially in Rwanda, not so much in Burundi, the common wisdom in Rwanda is we leave the past in the past and we have to move beyond it. We're all Rwandans, we're not Tutsis, we're not Hutus. If they can't talk about it, they're not going to get on the other side of it. And they're not going to get to a place where they can forgive if they can't process.
Okay.
I heard Howard Kennedy last week who basically said the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were there,
Yeah.
but I'm wondering how does this person, do they know that this person killed their parents? Were they witnesses?
They know. In a lot of cases, they know.
A lot of cases.
It's a
How
small
do you
world.
rebuild trust, which I've kind of heard under that last question? Isn't that the issue? How do I trust this person? How would I ever feel safe again that this person's not going to freak out and do this again?
How do I trust the world?
Well, especially when they're right here. This one killed my parents, why wouldn't he kill me? Or what's going to trigger him to want to do that?
That's a whole other workshop.
What's the name of that one?
Thanks for the gin, Judy. That was great. So the injury, deep, personal, long-lasting, doesn't matter whether it's physical, psychological, moral, all right? Part of understanding injury and helping the survivors to understand the injury is what seems to intensify it or deepen it is that there's this sense of injustice or unfairness. We have a different feeling about something that's happened to us that we really think was unfair. I didn't deserve it. That seems to hurt more. It seems to last longer. It seems to have more intense feelings than something that I brought on myself, for example. Okay? I'm not saying that we don't have intense feelings even with those, but there's something about that sense of, I didn't deserve that. Or when we hear about, little kids being hurt, that was just so unfair. There's nothing right about that. And that seems to deepen or make more intense the sense of injury and the feelings that go with it. One of the things that's important to understand about forgiveness is that it doesn't matter whether the other person intended it or not. Now, this takes us kind of out of the genocide experience, but it's a broader sense than that. If I'm hurt, does it really matter whether the other person intended to hurt me or not? Think physical first. I still have the injury, right? I'm still bleeding. If the other person says, oh, I didn't mean to cut you with the knife, does that make the wound go away? They say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that I hurt you. Do you immediately say, oh, I guess I wasn't hurt after all because you didn't know that you hurt me? Okay? The injury is what needs healing, regardless of whether the other person intended it, or knows that it happened, or knows how serious it hurt you. You ever had the experience where you're going to go back and you're going to try some kind of reconciliation with someone, I've been carrying around this hurt for 10 years, that 10 years ago you did this to me, and you're finally going to have the courage and go talk to them. They don't remember what you're talking about. You've got this thing that you're walking around. Now, does that immediately say, oh, I guess I wasn't hurt? I guess that just makes my hurt all go away because you don't even remember it. The hurt is still there, isn't it? Okay? So it's recognizing that it's the process I need for myself, not what it's for the other person, which comes to another big piece. The other person doesn't have to apologize in order to forgive. And actually, this can be a big setup that gets in the way of forgiveness. If I'm waiting for the other person to apologize, the person who hurt me, where did I just put all the power in the relationship? I put it back in the hands of the perpetrator, the offender. That's the last place where I want to put the power, especially the power for my healing. I want to give the power for my healing back to the person who hurt me. So waiting for the apology or judging the apology, well, they didn't really mean it. It wasn't that sincere. Or that I set up myself because I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for it, and I think that once I get that apology, then I'm going to be all better, or at least well on my way. It's not as significant a piece as we might think or want it to be, hope it will be. Okay? For some, it's a piece. For others, it's nothing. But the big important part is not to set ourselves up that we can't forgive and therefore we can't get better because we'll never get the apology. If the person's dead or unsafe or at a distance or doesn't remember, they're not going to apologize because they didn't think they did anything wrong, and I put that up then as the block for my healing, I got a big problem. Okay? So we don't want to put that in our way, right? Waiting for the apology. So, again, to repeat it, forgiveness is the gift that we give to ourselves because we're the one that's carrying around the burden. We're the one that's carrying around the hurt. We already got to the one earlier that's got a lot of variables to it. Okay, so while it's the same process, it's got a lot of different things in it. And you've heard me say it enough by now, it's a process, it's not an event. Okay, this is not, I go up, I forgive you, oh good. That was hard, but I got it out of the way. Okay, this is a process, it takes a lot of time. And if you need the art to help you, I say that forgiveness is not simple, linear, and constant, which means I start here and I just keep working my way and it just keeps better and better until it's done. Forgiveness actually looks more like that. Okay? It's not nice and simple and orderly and clean. We think that we've done a piece and then we find out I got to go back and I got to do it some more. We think that we've done it and then we find out when we see the person again, yeah, it's not as done as I thought it was. Okay? It takes time. Okay? So after all that, now I'm going to define forgiveness for you. Isn't that nice instead of starting with Webster's Dictionary at the beginning? Think about this and everything that you've heard from Sharon and me. When we've been hurt, it affects our emotions, feelings of bitterness, hatred, hurt, sadness, anger. It affects our emotions. It affects our behavior, both in terms of how we react out of our emotions. What do I do when I'm mad? What do I do or not do when I'm depressed? What do I do as I'm living out my hatred? How does it show up all over the place if I'm acting out, or if I've internalized it, how is it affecting me physically, right? It affects our emotions, it affects our behavior, and it affects our thinking, which are, okay? It affects how I think about the world, it affects how I think about the divine, it affects how I think about relationships. All of those are the effects of the injury. Forgiveness is changing our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior towards the person who hurt me. It's pretty simple. It's kind of benign in a sense, but it's really accurate. It's changing my thoughts, my feelings, and my behavior towards someone who hurt me so that I can live a healthier and more satisfying life. Instead of all that stuff, all that garbage, burden getting in the way of my life. It's for myself. It's to clear away the stuff of the past. Just a couple things, couple of kind of categories of what forgiveness isn't. Okay? It's not forgetting. Okay? We have that good old truism floating around of, forgive and forget. All right? If you've forgiven, it does not mean that you will forget, and chances are, if it's a deep injury, you're not going to forget. So again, setting that up as the goal or the principle, I still remember it, so I must not have forgiven. False. Okay? What you don't want is that you're living out of the past, or that you're bothered by the memory so much that you can't work, that you're having flashbacks, that it's interfering with your life. You want to be able to tell it without reliving it. There's a difference. Okay? Forgiveness isn't substitution for other things to make my life easier. So I'll just forgive and then I won't hate them anymore. Because hatred's bad. Okay? So we just say, I forgive them, and yet it doesn't seem to be working. It's not substituting feelings, one feeling for another feeling, so that I don't feel bad, or I don't feel hatred, or I don't feel anger. And certainly it's not just saying good old words, I forgive you. It's not substitution. Forgiveness isn't saying it was okay. There's a big fear sometimes if I forgive, one of the excuses that people will give is, if I forgive, that's saying it was okay. It's not. Or it's saying it wasn't that bad. Like we think that other people are going to judge us negatively. Let's say I was abused as a child, and Sharon has heard that I've forgiven my perpetrator. Sharon gets all ticked off. How could you forgive that SOB? Rah, 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 rah. It must not have been that bad for you if you could forgive them.
I would never.
She would, but it's what some people who've been hurt think. I can't forgive because then other people will think that what I said was bad wasn't really that bad. Okay? So it's not saying it's okay. It's not condoning it. It's not giving an excuse for it. It is saying there was a deep injury and now I'm going to move past that. I'm not saying that it was okay or that it was okay that they did it. And it's not just refraining from retaliation. One of the signs that we haven't forgiven is the desire for revenge or payback. Sometimes it's couched slightly differently, that we rejoice in their pain or hurt, or at least kind of relish the idea that they could be hurt. I just heard they were in a car accident. I really feel bad. And we don't. We kind of rejoice that they got some hurt, okay? Some people will say, I will forgive them after they hurt as much as I do. Okay? That's not what forgiveness is about. It's not about that retaliation. It's not payback. Forgiveness, which isn't really forgiveness, and payback is something like constantly reminding the other person how they hurt you. I've forgiven you, but you remember what you did, don't you? And then you revive the memory in case they've forgotten, right? It doesn't matter whether or not the other person has changed, you can forgive them. So you can forgive them whether they're still hurting other people, you can forgive them whether they're in jail, you can forgive them whether you see them or not. It's not whether they've changed and therefore you forgive them, it's what you're doing in yourself. And forgiveness